It was supposed to be a celebration. Our daughter had just graduated from college, a milestone we had both worked so hard to make possible. The dining room was filled with laughter, clinking glasses, the aroma of roast beef and rosemary potatoes, her favorite. My parents were there, his brother, our daughter beaming at the head of the table, pride glowing in her eyes. I remember thinking, this is the kind of night you hold on to forever. And I will, just not for the reasons I thought. Halfway through. Dessert, as the conversation turned to plans for summer and what came next for her, my husband, Michael, lifted his wine glass and stood. At first I thought he was going to make a toast, but what came out of his mouth left me breathless, suspended, in time like a deer staring down headlights. I have something to share, he said, smiling awkwardly. I've decided to leave the marriage. I've met someone else. The room fell into stunned silence. Forks hovered mid-air. My daughter's eyes widened and my mother nearly dropped her glass. And me? I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. His words felt like a grenade tossed onto the table, shattering everything we'd built, without warning, without remorse. He just announced it. In front of our family. No private conversation, no decency, no dignity. Just that. For a moment, I thought maybe I'd misheard, that this was some horrible joke gone wrong. But as he calmly sipped his wine and looked down at me, eyes empty, of regret, I knew it was real. I didn't want to keep living a lie, he said flatly. We've grown apart. I think we'll both be happier. I think we'll both be happier. As if this was mutual. As if he hadn't just humiliated me, blindsided our daughter, and dismantled our marriage of 21 years in front of an audience. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the soft clatter of my spoon falling into my untouched dessert. I couldn't feel my hands. My heart thudded so loudly in my ears I could barely hear anything else. Betrayal doesn't come with a warning. It just tears through your life like a wildfire, leaving nothing untouched. I excused myself quietly, made it to the bathroom before the tears came. I didn't cry from sadness. Not yet. It was rage. A white-hot fury that pulsed through every nerve in my body. How dare he? After everything. After 2 decades of building a life together, supporting him through job losses, standing by him, when his father died, raising a child together. This was how he ended it? He thought he could humiliate me and walk away unscathed. He thought I would just crumble. He didn't know me at all. I splashed cold water on my face, forced a smile. Back on and returned to the table. I played the part of the blindsided wife perfectly. Numb, quiet, humiliated. But inside, something was changing. Breaking, yes, but also shifting. That night, while he packed a small bag and mumbled something about needing space, I stared at the ceiling in the dark. My daughter cried herself to sleep in the next room, and I made a promise to myself. He would regret this. Not just for the betrayal, but for the way he did it, for thinking he could erase me like a name on a whiteboard, move on to his younger, shinier new life without facing the consequences of what he'd done. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do yet, but I knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The next morning, he was gone. No note, no goodbye. Just a half-empty closet and the faint scent of his cologne lingering in the bedroom we once shared. My daughter, Rachel, sat across the kitchen table, eyes red and swollen. Why did he do it like that? She asked, voice cracking. I didn't have an answer. I was still trying to process it myself. In the days that followed, the truth started to unravel, slowly at first, then all at once. It wasn't just about growing apart. No, Michael had been planning this for months, maybe longer. His, late nights at work, spent with her, his sudden interest in fitness and changing his wardrobe, her influence. He was, as it turns out, fully immersed in his midlife crisis, complete with a 29-year-old personal trainer named Kelsey. Kelsey. Of course it was someone like that. I tried to keep things together, for Rachel, for myself, but with every passing day, I felt the weight of what he'd done pressing harder on my chest. I'd given this man everything, my youth, my trust, my sacrifices. I'd taken a step back in my career so he could climb the ladder. I handled the bills, the PTA meetings, the family holidays. I put his needs before my own more times than I could count. And how did he repay me? By tossing me aside like expired milk. By parading his new life on social media as if the last 21 years were some kind of boring prequel to his true happiness. He blocked me on Facebook. That was the real kicker. I only found out about Kelsey because Rachel stumbled onto his new profile photo. Michael, arms wrapped around her at a rooftop bar, grinning like a teenager who'd just stolen his dad's car. The caption read, "New beginnings." He was flaunting it, the affair, the betrayal, and he wasn't even trying to hide it. But it wasn't just the emotional pain, it was the logistical nightmare that followed. He stopped paying his share of the mortgage, claimed he was reevaluating his finances. My name was still on the joint credit cards, and suddenly, unexplained charges were showing up. Luxury dinners, hotel stays, spa visits in Miami. Meanwhile, I was left scrambling to keep the household running. When I reached out to him, he acted like I was overreacting. "We're separated," he said, tone cold. "I'm allowed to live my life." I was stunned by how quickly he had turned. The man I married, who once cried at our daughter's birth, who used to warm my car on snowy mornings, was gone. Replaced by a smug, distant stranger who had decided his happiness was the only thing that mattered. But the worst part? The legal documents arrived 2 weeks later. He was filing for divorce, and he wanted everything. Half the house, a chunk of my retirement savings, and spousal support, the gall. He wanted me to pay him, so he could keep living his fantasy life with a woman who probably hadn't even been born when we first got married. That was the moment something inside me snapped. This wasn't just about heartbreak anymore. It was about survival, about dignity, about justice. I wasn't going to be left penniless, humiliated, and erased. He thought he could just walk out and rewrite the narrative of our lives to suit his ego. That I'd stay silent, maybe cry to my friends and let him paint me as the bitter, aging wife who just didn't understand him anymore. But I was done playing the victim. He may have made the first move, but this wasn't a game he was going to win. Because if Michael thought he could steal my life, my money, and my peace, he was about to learn what real consequences looked like. It wasn't just the betrayal of love. It was the betrayal of partnership, of the promises we made, not just at the altar, but in the countless little ways over the years. We built a life together, or so I thought. But Michael had been preparing his exit quietly, like a thief casing his own home. What made it worse was how deliberate it all seemed. The financial sabotage wasn't accidental, it was strategic. I discovered he'd been moving money into a separate account for the past 6 months, in small enough amounts to avoid raising flags. He'd liquidated a portion of our joint investments weeks before that family dinner. While I was busy planning Rachel's graduation party, he was plotting his escape. He wanted a clean break, with the cash. I spoke to a financial advisor who looked at our accounts and said, "He's trying to drain you before you even get to court." And that's when it all became crystal clear. He didn't just want out. He wanted everything. The house, the assets, the narrative. If he won, I wouldn't just lose a husband. I'd lose my future. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about Rachel, too. She still had student loans. She was just starting out. What would it say to her if I rolled over and let her father steamroll me in broad daylight? I raised her to be strong, to speak up, to never let anyone treat her like she was disposable. What kind of example would I be if I let myself get walked over now? Michael thought he was smarter. He thought I was soft, sentimental, incapable of fighting back. But what he failed to see, what men like him always fail to see, is that women don't break. We transform. The deeper I dug, the more I uncovered. He had already moved in with Kelsey, into a condo I didn't even know he owned. It had been in his name for over a year. He claimed it was a work rental. In reality, it was his getaway pad, a place he'd furnished, decorated, and stocked for a life I was never meant to be part of. It hit me then. This didn't start 6 months ago. It started long before that. While I was nursing his mother through cancer. While I was working overtime during the pandemic to make up for his furlough. While I was too busy being everything for everyone. And that's what hurt the most. I hadn't been blind. I had trusted. And he had weaponized that trust. But the pain wasn't just emotional. It was tangible. I started having migraines, panic, attacks in the middle of the night. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, gasping for air, convinced the walls were closing in. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Every time my phone buzzed, I braced myself for another blow. Meanwhile, he was posting Instagram stories from rooftop lounges and wellness retreats, playing the role of a liberated man finally living his truth. The injustice clawed at me every single day, but it also lit a fire in me I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't going to let my story end with betrayal. I wasn't going to let Rachel grow up believing this was how women were treated, discarded, drained, and disrespected. He chose to turn our life into a battlefield. And I was done being unarmed. So I started gathering every receipt, every email, every document he was too arrogant to think I'd find. I started making calls, quiet ones, to lawyers, to financial advisors, to women who'd walked this road before me and knew exactly how to fight back. I had spent too long being the woman behind the man. It was time to become the woman who stood up, not just for herself, but for every woman who'd been burned by someone who once looked them in the eyes and swore they'd never leave. He thought this was his happy ending, but I was just getting started. The first thing I learned from speaking to a divorce attorney was this. Michael had made a critical mistake. He filed early, prematurely, probably out of arrogance or some twisted desire to assert control. But that gave me something invaluable: time. And in war, time is strategy. The attorney, a sharp, unshakable woman named Grace, reviewed the documents, leaned back in her chair, and said calmly, "He thinks you're going to lie down. You're not. We're going to make him regret that." I smiled for the first time in weeks. We started with the money. Grace referred me to a forensic accountant. Yes, that's a real thing, who dug into our financial records. Every transaction, every bank statement, every investment account. It turns out Michael had been sloppy. He thought transferring small sums from our joint savings into a business account would go unnoticed. He was wrong. The condo? He had purchased it under an LLC, but a few overlooked email confirmations tied his name to it. And because we were still legally married at the time of purchase, it counted as a marital asset. Every lie left a paper trail, and I was collecting every single breadcrumb. Next, I created a private digital folder. I called it Operation Closure. It was where I stored everything: evidence, screenshots, even a video Rachel had secretly recorded of one of Michael's drunken rants when he admitted to getting ahead of the game before things went south. My heart broke when I found out she had overheard him on the phone, laughing with a friend about trading up and calling me a financial deadweight. But I wasn't going to let heartbreak slow me down anymore. Emotion is powerful, but strategy is deadly. Michael underestimated the woman he left behind. The woman who had once organized fundraisers, managed home renovations, balanced spreadsheets, and kept 3 generations of a family running like a well-oiled machine. I didn't just love. I managed. I led. And now I would use every ounce of that strength to dismantle the fantasy world he built on my back. I also hired a private investigator, not for drama, but for leverage. Within a week, I had confirmation that he had been seeing Kelsey long before our separation. Photos, dates, hotel check-ins. He even used our joint card to pay for one of their trips. Infidelity, especially when you fund it with marital assets. That holds weight in court. Then came the hardest part: pretending. For weeks, I kept my tone calm in emails, friendly, cooperative. I didn't alert him that anything had changed. That was crucial. He needed to believe I was broken, that he was winning, because only then would he let his guard down completely. And that's exactly what he did. He started asking for more money for legal fees. Claimed he wanted an amicable settlement, which really meant give me everything so I can disappear faster. He even had the nerve to text me a selfie from a beach with Kelsey, followed by, "Hope we can be adults about this." Adults. As if adults destroy their families like this. As if real men lie, cheat, steal, and then call it a fresh start. But I didn't respond. I just forwarded the photo to Grace and added it to the file. By the end of the month, I had everything I needed: financial evidence, proof of infidelity, and a team of professionals who had seen it all and were ready to take him down piece by piece. Michael thought the divorce would be simple. He thought I'd panic, cry, beg. But instead, I sharpened every blade he handed me and built my case brick by brick. He had spent years crafting a mask of respectability, of charm, of success. I was about to tear it off and show the world what really hid beneath. And the best part? He had no idea what was coming. I was done crying, done waiting, done letting Michael dictate the terms of my life. Now it was my turn. The first real step? Locking down my own finances. Grace and the forensic accountant helped me close our joint credit cards and secure the accounts that were still legally mine. I opened a new bank account, one only I had access to, and began documenting every communication, text, email, call log, all of it. Every move he made was being tracked, time-stamped, and stored, organized, strategically curated for the inevitable day in court. You see, courts don't care much about emotions, but they do care about numbers, timelines, and evidence. That's where women like me often lose ground. We go in with heartbreak and hope, but what you need is proof. So I built my case like an architect, precise, immaculate, bulletproof. I contacted HR at Michael's company under the guise of updating spousal benefits. That's when I learned something interesting. He hadn't just been spending more time at the office. He had used company funds to fly Kelsey to a conference. He even billed their couple's massage as a stress therapy session on his expense report. That went straight into the file. Then came social media. Michael was arrogant. He couldn't resist flaunting his new freedom. His Instagram feed became a goldmine. I cataloged every post, every comment, every tag. Him and Kelsey on a boat. Her wearing what looked suspiciously like a necklace I once owned. Romantic getaways that lined up perfectly with days he claimed to be working late or visiting his brother. I wasn't stalking. I was preparing. Meanwhile, I began building my support system. I told close friends the truth, no more hiding. It behind fake smiles. I reached out to women in my network who'd gone through nasty divorces, and they gave me practical advice I'll never forget. Document everything. Even if it feels petty. Especially if it feels petty. Don't get baited into emotional responses. Stay calm. Let them underestimate you. Appear cooperative but never naive. Be the woman who says yes to lunch while preparing to file the motion that will freeze his assets. And that's exactly what I did. I met Michael for lunch one afternoon, pretending to want closure. I wore soft colors, acted warm, even laughed at his pathetic jokes. He had no idea the entire conversation was being recorded, within legal limits, of course. He told me he hadn't been with Kelsey that long, that it just happened, and that maybe we'd even find our way back after the dust settled. That recording would later become one of our key exhibits in mediation. That same week, we served him with a formal response to his divorce petition, complete with a counterclaim citing marital waste, hidden assets, and infidelity. Grace made I sure it landed at his workplace just before his quarterly performance review. I won't lie, there was a part of me that enjoyed that. Because revenge, it's not about screaming or breaking things. It's about control, reclaiming your voice, your dignity, your narrative. While Michael was out drinking overpriced cocktails and chasing youth, I was rebuilding myself from the ground up. I joined a local women's business group. I started taking yoga, not because I wanted to relax, but because I wanted to reclaim my body, my breath, my sense of power. I stopped checking his social media. Not because I didn't care anymore, but because I'd already won. He just didn't know it yet. By the time we entered mediation, I was calm, composed, unshakable. He expected tears, regret, desperation. Instead, I slid a binder across the table filled with every lie, every receipt, every piece of evidence that tied his fantasy life directly to our shared accounts. And when he saw it, he went pale. He stammered, tried to backpedal, tried to negotiate. But it was too late. He made his choices. Now he would face them. The mediation room was sterile. White walls, no windows, quiet as a church. Michael sat across from me in a navy suit he probably borrowed from someone else's sense of self-respect. Kelsey wasn't there. Of course not. She didn't want to witness the unraveling. She only liked the version of him that had no past, just a curated present. Grace sat beside me, calm and razor-sharp. The mediator began reading from the file, detailing the evidence we'd submitted. The condo, the misused funds, the timeline of the affair, the violation of our prenup clauses, the hidden accounts, the company expense report violations. All of it read aloud like a final confession. Michael kept shifting in his seat. He tried to interrupt, but Grace simply raised a hand and said, "Let him speak." We wanted his reactions recorded, his stammering, his evasions, his sudden concern for privacy. He looked at me once, his face pleading. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly, like we were sharing a secret. But we weren't allies anymore. I stared him down, unblinking. You already did. By the end of the session, the outcome was clear. He was going to walk away with far less than he expected, and far less than he deserved. The judge later ruled that his actions constituted marital fraud and infidelity-based financial abuse. He would not get the house. Not a dime of my retirement, and most importantly, he was ordered to repay thousands he had taken from our accounts and was denied spousal support entirely. In fact, I was awarded damages. His lawyer, clearly caught off guard, tried to negotiate, but there was no room left for sympathy. This wasn't vengeance for vengeance's sake. This was justice. When we stepped into the hallway afterward, he followed me. Rachel won't forgive you for this, he said, desperate, cruel. His last card to play. I turned slowly. She's the one who suggested I file the infidelity clause. He went silent. He knew then. It was over. The mask had cracked, and there was no putting it back on. No charming his way out of it. No guilt-tripping. No rewriting the narrative. I walked out of that building lighter than I'd felt in years. The sky looked different, wider. I could finally breathe. In the weeks that followed, he tried reaching out again, messages dripping. With regret, begging for another chance, swearing it was just a phase, that he'd made a mistake. He even emailed a photo of the dinner table from that night, the night he dropped the bomb on our family, and wrote, "Remember this moment? I do." Yes, I remembered it perfectly. It was the night I died and was reborn. I didn't respond. I blocked him, permanently. His access to my life was revoked. And Rachel? She came home for a weekend not long after everything was finalized. We sat on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the trees, a comfortable silence between us. Then she said, "You know, I used to think you were the soft one." I raised an eyebrow. But now? I realize you're the strongest woman I've ever met. That meant more than anything. Because this wasn't just about revenge. It was about transformation. Michael thought he was burning my world down, but all he really did was light the match that set me free. Now I've gone back to school part-time. I started a small consulting business from home. I reclaimed pieces of myself I hadn't touched in years. And I'm not interested in dating right now, not because I'm bitter, but because I'm finally whole. I learned something in all of this. Sometimes karma doesn't come in thunder or fire. Sometimes karma is a woman in heels walking out of a courthouse with her head held high and her future finally in her own hands. Michael got what he wanted. Freedom. I got what I deserved. Peace, power, and the last word. And trust me, that last word was silence. The kind that comes when you've said everything without saying a thing.